Most men worship at the altar of security. They beg for raises. They celebrate promotions. They trade their years for pensions and call it wisdom. And then they die, never having touched real power, never having known what it means to impose their will upon reality itself. Friedrich Nietzsche understood something that terrifies the comfortable. Security is the enemy of greatness. The man who seeks safety above all else has already surrendered his potential. He has chosen the slow death of predictability over the violent birth of transformation. The secret of reaping the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment from life is to live dangerously, Nietzsche wrote. Not recklessly, dangerously. There's a universe of difference. This isn't about wealth as most people understand it. This is about psychological domination of your own reality, about becoming the architect of your circumstances rather than their prisoner, about understanding that true wealth begins not with money, but with the ruthless control of your own psychology. Let me show you how the strongest minds build empires from nothing. The first, rupture. Destroy your slave morality. There are two types of morality in this world: master morality and slave morality. The slave believes suffering is virtue, that humility is strength, that obedience deserves reward, that if he's just good enough, patient enough, loyal enough, the universe will compensate him. This is the psychology of the dominated, and it keeps more people poor than any economic system ever could. Master morality operates differently. The master doesn't wait for permission. He doesn't seek validation. He doesn't confuse suffering with nobility. He creates his own values, defines his own standards, and imposes them on the world around him. Look at your relationship with money. Are you asking what you deserve? That's slave morality. Are you waiting for someone to recognize your worth? Slave morality. Are you trading your time for someone else's dream while calling it stability? Slave morality. The master asks different questions. What do I want? What am I willing to become to get it? What rules can I rewrite? What games can I refuse to play? This psychological shift is the foundation of everything. Because you cannot build wealth with the mindset of someone who needs permission to live. You cannot accumulate power while operating in someone else's value system. The first step toward self-made wealth is the complete annihilation of your slave psychology. You must become the source of your own authority. You must stop seeking external validation for your choices. You must develop what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not power over others, though that may follow. Power over yourself, the capacity to override your conditioning, your fear, your need for comfort, the ability to impose discipline when discipline is required, the strength to endure isolation when isolation is necessary. Most people never take this step. They spend their entire lives as psychological slaves, occasionally switching masters, but never freeing themselves. And then they wonder why wealth eludes them, why power seems reserved for others, why they feel perpetually stuck. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot worship security and build an empire. Choose the will to power, channeling psychological force into material reality. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is perhaps the most misunderstood idea in philosophy. It's not about dominating others. It's about the fundamental drive to overcome resistance, to expand your capacity, to transform yourself into something greater than what you are. This is the engine of all wealth creation, not greed, not ambition in the shallow sense, but the deep existential need to test yourself against reality and win. Every dollar you earn is a measurement of value you've imposed on the world. Every business you build is an extension of your will made concrete. Every system you create is your psychology externalized. The weak see money as something to be obtained, something that comes from outside, something that requires luck or favor or inheritance. The strong see money as the natural byproduct of psychological dominance, of taking chaotic reality and bending it toward order, of seeing what others cannot see and creating what others cannot create. This is why self-made wealth is fundamentally different from inherited wealth. The heir has money, but no power. He has resources, but no force. He can lose everything and never regain it, because the psychological foundation was never built. The self-made wealthy built their fortune from psychological substrate. They developed capacities that cannot be taken away. Vision, discipline, the ability to endure uncertainty, the capacity to persist through failure, the strength to stand alone when necessary. These aren't just character traits, they're weapons. They're the raw materials of wealth itself. Think about what happens when you develop genuine psychological control. When you can override the impulse for immediate gratification and invest in compound returns. When you can sit with discomfort instead of medicating it with consumption. When you can maintain focus on a distant goal while everyone around you chases temporary pleasures. You become dangerous, not to others, to circumstance itself. You stop reacting to your environment and start shaping it. You stop being moved by economic forces and start leveraging them. You stop asking for opportunity and start creating it. This is the will to power in action, not philosophy. Practical psychology that generates material results, the eternal recurrence, building wealth that compounds forever. Nietzsche posed a thought experiment. What if you had to live your life over and over again, eternally, exactly as you're living it now? Every choice, every action, every moment repeated infinitely. Would you welcome this, or would you recoil in horror? This isn't just philosophy. It's a diagnostic tool for your current trajectory, because your daily actions are creating your eternal reality. Not in some mystical sense, in the brutal mathematics of compound interest. Every hour you waste is compounding into decades of mediocrity. Every dollar you spend instead of invest is multiplying into millions of lost potential. Every choice to stay comfortable is cementing your current position as permanent. The wealthy understand eternal recurrence instinctively. They know that today's discipline is tomorrow's freedom, that this year's sacrifice is next decade's security, that the systems they build now will generate returns forever. They're not just working, they're installing loops, creating mechanisms that repeat profitable actions automatically, building structures that compound without their presence. This is why the rich get richer. Not because the game is rigged, though sometimes it is, because they understand temporal mechanics. They know how to trade present for future at advantageous ratios. They know how to create systems that loop positive outcomes endlessly. The poor do the opposite. They trade future for present. They extract temporary pleasure at the cost of permanent progress. They optimize for immediate relief instead of delayed victory. And then, they live the same year over and over again, wondering why nothing changes, why wealth never arrives, why they're still trapped in the same patterns they were trapped in a decade ago. This is their eternal recurrence, the hell of repetition without growth. Break this cycle. Stop optimizing for today. Start building loops that favor tomorrow. Create systems that would make you proud to repeat eternally. Ask yourself, if I had to live today forever, would I? If the answer is no, change today. Because in the mathematics of compound interest, you already are beyond good and evil. The amorality of wealth creation. The morality you were taught is an obstacle to wealth, not because wealth requires evil, because wealth requires amorality. The ability to operate beyond the simple binary of good and evil that keeps most people imprisoned. Nietzsche understood that morality is often a weapon used by the weak to constrain the strong. You shouldn't want more. You shouldn't charge that much. You shouldn't pursue wealth while others suffer. These aren't moral truths, they're psychological chains. The wealthy don't reject morality entirely. They just don't let other people's moral frameworks limit their economic choices. They understand that wealth creation is fundamentally amoral. It's not good or evil. It's effective or ineffective. This doesn't mean lying, cheating, or stealing. That's just criminal stupidity. It means refusing to handicap yourself with guilt that serves no purpose except to keep you small. The person who won't charge what they're worth because it feels greedy isn't moral. They're a slave. The person who won't promote themselves because it feels arrogant isn't humble. They're afraid. The person who won't pursue wealth because others have less isn't compassionate. They're self-destructive. Here's what Nietzsche would tell you. Create your own values. Decide for yourself what serves your highest potential. Stop letting the mediocre define what's acceptable for you. If you want to build massive wealth while also contributing to humanity, excellent. If you want to accumulate resources purely for personal freedom, that's also valid. If you want to create generational security for your lineage, do it without apology. But don't let anyone convince you that your desire for wealth is somehow morally inferior to their desire for comfort. Don't accept the premise that ambition requires justification. Don't internalize the psychological poison that says wanting more makes you wrong. The strong don't ask permission to pursue greatness. They don't seek moral validation from people who've achieved nothing. They create their own ethical framework and operate within it with absolute integrity. This is beyond good and evil. Not beneath it, beyond it. Übermensch economics, becoming the architect of your own fortune. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who transcends conventional limitations, applies perfectly to wealth creation. Not as some mystical evolution, as practical psychology. The Übermensch doesn't follow the herd. He creates new paths. He doesn't accept existing value systems. He generates his own. He doesn't wait for circumstances to improve. He becomes the circumstance that others must navigate. In economic terms, this means several things. First, you must stop thinking like an employee. The employee mindset is fundamentally reactive. Someone else sets the rules, determines the value, defines the game. You're playing in their system, on their terms, for their benefit. The Übermensch creates systems. He doesn't ask for a raise. He builds businesses that generate income without his presence. He doesn't compete for positions. He creates positions that others compete for. He doesn't trade time for money. He builds leverage that multiplies effort into fortune. This isn't about being an entrepreneur specifically. It's about psychological sovereignty, about refusing to let others define your economic worth, about becoming the source rather than the recipient. Second, you must embrace radical self-reliance, not the rugged individualism that denies reality, the psychological fortitude that accepts reality completely and refuses to be its victim. Things will go wrong, markets will crash, opportunities will disappear, people will betray you, and the Übermensch response is always the same. What now? Not why me. Not, it's not fair. Just, what now? This shift in psychology is worth more than any business degree, because it means you're never waiting for rescue, never dependent on circumstances aligning, never at the mercy of forces outside your control. You may not control the market, but you control your response to the market. You may not control opportunity, but you control your preparation for opportunity. You may not control your starting point, but you control your direction. Third, you must develop the capacity for sustained intensity. The Übermensch doesn't peak and plateau. He continually exceeds his previous limitations. He doesn't set a goal, achieve it, and rest. He uses each achievement as a platform for the next. This is how fortunes are built, not through isolated wins, through compounding psychological intensity that refuses to accept any ceiling as final. Most people have one good year, maybe two, then settle into maintenance mode. They achieve a level of comfort and defend it rather than using it as a base camp for further ascent. The Ubermensch sees every plateau as temporary, every achievement as insufficient. Not because he's never satisfied, but because he understands that the moment you stop growing, you start dying. This isn't about money anymore. It's about what you're becoming, and what you're becoming determines everything you'll have. The transvaluation of money, from burden to tool. Most people have a diseased relationship with money. They see it as safety or status or validation. They hoard it or waste it. They worship it or despise it. Either way, they're enslaved by it. Nietzsche talked about the transvaluation of values, taking what you've been taught to believe and reassessing it from first principles, creating new meaning from old material. Apply this to money. What is it actually? Not what you've been taught, what it actually is. It's stored effort, compressed time, potential energy, a tool for imposing your will on material reality. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not security. Security is an illusion. It's not status. Status is a game for children. It's not validation. Your worth isn't measured in dollars. Money is a tool, and once you see it clearly, once you strip away all the psychological baggage, you can use it with precision. The wealthy don't love money. They use it. They leverage it. They deploy it strategically to create more options, more freedom, more capacity. They don't spend money to feel rich. They spend money to become more effective. Education that increases earning power. Systems that automate income. Assets that appreciate while they sleep. Experiences that expand their perspective and capability. Every dollar is a soldier. Every investment is a strategic position. Every purchase is evaluated against a single criterion. Does this increase my capacity, or does it merely decorate my life? This transvaluation, this complete reframing of what money means and how it functions, is worth more than any specific strategy or tactic. Because once you see money clearly, once you strip away the emotional charge, you can move it with precision. You stop confusing spending with living. You stop confusing accumulation with achievement. You stop confusing net worth with self-worth. Money becomes what it always should have been, a tool in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. Amor fati, loving your financial reality into transformation. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, seems paradoxical in the context of wealth creation. If you love what is, why would you work to change it? But that's a misunderstanding. Amor fati doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means removing the psychological resistance that drains your energy and clouds your judgment. Most people are at war with their current financial reality. They resent where they are. They rage against their starting point. They waste massive amounts of psychological energy on anger, envy, resentment, self-pity. This is pure waste. Those emotions don't change anything. They just drain the fuel you need for actual transformation. The wealthy practice a different psychology. They accept their current position completely, not as permanent, as current. They look at their bank account, their debts, their obligations, their limitations, and they say, "This is my reality. Now what?" No drama. No stories about unfairness. No energy wasted on resistance. All available force directed toward transformation. This isn't easy. It requires you to make peace with uncomfortable truth. You're not as far along as you wanted to be. You made mistakes. You wasted time. You chose poorly. You started behind. Accept it. Love it even. Not because it's good, because it's real. And you can't transform what you refuse to see clearly. Once you accept your current reality without judgment, without emotional charge, without resistance, You can assess it objectively. You can identify what needs to change. You can create strategy. You can execute with precision. The energy you were wasting on resentment now fuels creation. The attention you were spending on comparison now focuses on progress. The force you were directing against yourself now moves toward your goals. This is amor fati applied to wealth. Complete acceptance of where you are, combined with absolute refusal to stay there. The doctrine of eternal self-overcoming. Nietzsche believed the purpose of existence is self-overcoming. To continuously exceed your previous limitations. To perpetually become something more than what you were. This isn't just philosophy. It's the psychology of wealth. The person who makes $50,000 a year and stays there for a decade hasn't failed to get lucky. They've failed to overcome themselves. They've reached a level of comfort and stopped pushing. The person who builds $1 million net worth and maintains it but never exceeds it has stopped growing. They've turned achievement into a resting place rather than a launching pad. The person who retires and stops creating has chosen death over life. They've traded the struggle of becoming for the ease of being. This sounds harsh. It is harsh, but it's also true. Every level of wealth you achieve is just the base camp for the next ascent. Not because you need more money, because you need more self, more capacity, more proof that you can overcome limitation, more evidence that you're still alive. The wealthy understand this intuitively. They don't stop at their first million. They don't rest at financial independence. They continue creating, building, exceeding because the game was never about the money. It was always about what you have to become to earn the money. This is the doctrine of eternal self-overcoming applied to economics. You don't build wealth to rest. You build wealth to prove you can. And then you build more to prove you can exceed that. And then more to prove there is no ceiling. Not for the money itself, for the self that emerges in the process. Most people will call this insatiable. They'll say you're never satisfied. They'll pity you for not knowing when enough is enough. Let them. They've chosen comfort over growth, maintenance over transformation, the slow death of stasis over the violent life of continuous becoming. You've chosen differently. You've chosen to never stop becoming more than you are. To never accept any limitation as final. To never let your greatest achievement become your final achievement. This is Nietzsche's blueprint for wealth, not just financial wealth, psychological wealth, the kind that can't be taken away because it's woven into who you've become. The final transvaluation, from money to meaning. Here's what Nietzsche understood that most people miss. The ultimate goal isn't wealth. It's the self you have to forge to earn it. Money is just measurement. It's how reality keeps score of the value you're creating. But the actual prize is what you become in the process of creating that value. The discipline you develop to build systems. The patience you cultivate to wait for compound returns. The vision you refine to see opportunities others miss. The courage you forge to take calculated risks, the strength you build to endure setbacks. These aren't means to an end. They are the end. The person who builds a fortune and loses it can rebuild it, because the true wealth was never the money. It was the psychological capacity that generated the money. The person who inherits a fortune and squanders it can never reclaim it, because they never built the capacity in the first place. This is why self-made wealth is fundamentally different. It's not just about accumulation, it's about transformation. You're not just getting rich, you're becoming someone capable of getting rich. Someone who can see clearly, think strategically, act decisively, persist indefinitely. And that person, that psychological construct you build through the process of wealth creation, is worth more than any bank account. Because that person can lose everything and start over. That person can be dropped into any economy and thrive. That person can face any challenge and overcome it. Not because they're lucky, because they've forged themselves into something that cannot be broken by circumstance. This is Nietzsche's ultimate lesson. Don't just pursue wealth. Pursue the self-overcoming that wealth requires. Don't just accumulate money. Accumulate capacity. The fortune you build might disappear. Markets crash, businesses fail, assets evaporate. But the person you became to build that fortune, that's permanent. That's transferable. That's real wealth. So yes, build your empire. Accumulate your resources. Achieve financial freedom. But never forget what you're actually doing. You're not just making money. You're making yourself. And that self, that forged and tempered and tested self, is the only wealth that matters.